Yo, what's going on, guys? Cultofmush back at it with another video. We've got system requirements for two pretty big PC games coming out in the next few months. First, we have Titanfall 2, and then we also have Resident Evil 7. I'll cover Titanfall 2 first, since that's the one that's coming out next month. Resident Evil 7 isn't out until January, so we still got a little bit of time before that. So let's get right into Titanfall 2 system requirements. First, for minimum CPU requirements for the game, you're looking at an Intel Core i3 3600. That's pretty low-end stuff. A Core i3 as minimum is probably accurate for Titanfall 2. Keep in mind, Titanfall wasn't a super intensive game, so I don't think that's too surprising. For recommended, you are looking at an Intel Core i5 6600 or equivalent. Usually, whenever they list something like the i5 6600, if you have an older generation i5, you'll be fine, especially if you have an overclocked i5. You will probably be fine with this game. For Titanfall 2, the devs have also gone out of their way to list requirements for Ultra 4K 60 FPS requirements, so that's pretty nice to see. And for those settings, the CPU they're requiring is an Intel Core i7 6700K or equivalent. That is Ultra 4K at 60 FPS. That is a very small market, and if you're the kind of guy where you're looking to game at 4K and 60 FPS, you probably have something like the Core i7 6700K, so that shouldn't be too big of a deal anyway. RAM requirement, you're looking at 8GB minimum, 16GB recommended, and 16GB for Ultra 4K 60. Again, nothing too surprising here. Recommended RAM being 16GB, that does seem a little bit high. Again, Titanfall, the first game, wasn't anything too intensive. I imagine with 8GB of RAM, you're probably going to be fine, but 16GB of RAM, more and more games are starting to recommend it, so that might not be a bad upgrade, as I've been saying recently. For GPU requirement, which you guys mainly care about, minimum, you're looking at an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 660 2GB or an AMD Radeon HD 7850 2GB. Two very old cards. I believe both of those are like 4 years old. If you've built a PC recently, chances are you have something substantially better than those GPUs, but if not, if you have something around the 660, a 2GB video card, you will be good to run Titanfall 2, at least in terms of minimum requirements. Recommended, they are recommending an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060 6GB or an AMD Radeon RX 480 8GB, so kind of high-end. For a game like this, that is kind of high-end in my opinion. A 1060 6GB is kind of insane. I mean, if you're gaming at 1080p 60 FPS, I don't think this game's gonna require a 1060 6GB. Maybe I'm wrong. Those two GPUs do hover around the $250 to $300 price point, so that is actually kind of high. Usually you don't see that stark of a difference when you go from a GTX 660 all the way up to a 1060, but again, we'll know more when the game is released, and sometimes with the recommended requirements, they do go a little bit overboard. I don't think it'll be anything too crazy. And for Ultra 4K 60 FPS, the GPU they have listed is the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 8GB. Again, if you're gaming at 4K 60 FPS, you probably have something like the 1080, so that's not too big of a deal. I don't put too much stock in these requirements. They're nice to have, don't get me wrong, but it is a very small minority of people that actually game at 4K. And if you're gaming at that resolution, well, you know that you're gonna have to pay to run games at that resolution. Alright, let's move on to Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. I'm actually very excited for this game. This seems to be a stark direction shift for the series. If you guys have played the recent Resident Evil games, they've been very action-oriented, but RE7 looks to be going back to its horror roots, so that's very nice. And we've got the minimum and recommended requirements, so let's get right into this. Minimum CPU requirement, Intel Core i5 4460 2.7GHz or an AMD FX 6300 or better. The i5 4460 is obviously a much better CPU than the FX 6300. A lot of games seem to be doing this. I believe Battlefield 1 also did this, where they listed an i5 and then they listed the FX 6300 alongside it as minimum. Chances are an i3 will get the job done. I know that my word isn't gospel, but if you're recommending an FX 6300, chances are a decent i3 will also do the trick. That is minimum requirements, so I do get why developers would shy away from listing a dual-core processor as minimum, but at the end of the day, in the majority of cases, they do run the game, so that's all that matters. And for recommended CPU, you're looking at an Intel Core i7 3770 3.4GHz, and they don't even have an AMD CPU listed alongside it. Again, with most games, when they list an i7 3770 or an i7 in general, if you have an overclocked i5, you're usually fine. That's been the case for me. And in most cases, even if you have a stock clocked i5, you're usually pretty good to go. And it seems like this whole video I've just been crapping on system requirements, but it is good to go over them, but at the end of the day, sometimes you do have to take them with a grain of salt. Minimum and recommended recommended RAM requirement are 8 gigabytes of RAM. That's nothing too surprising. I feel like that's been the case with a lot of games, but it's surprising to see that they don't have 16 gigabytes listed as recommended, because that has been the trend that I've been noticing with a lot of the newer games. But I digress, no real importance there. Let's move on to the GPUs. For minimum GPU requirements, you're looking at a GeForce GTX 760 or an AMD Radeon R7 260X. I believe the 760 is well above the R7 260X, so that is a little weird. But nonetheless, those video cards are very old. The R7 260X isn't a world beater, and the GTX 760 at this point, that's not an amazing GPU either, but it's nice to see those GPUs being listed as minimum. For recommended GPU requirement, you're looking at an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 960 or an AMD Radeon R9 280X or better. The 960 and the R9 280X, those are pretty mid-range video cards. At the time where these cards were really popular, they were around $180 to $200. Now, obviously, with other GPUs out there valued at a little bit less, but that seems about right for a game like this. By the way, for minimum and recommended requirements, they are saying that recommended is for 1080p at 60 FPS, and for minimum, they're listing it as 1080p 30 FPS, and players will have to either lower texture or set streaming textures to off in order to optimize performance. So yeah, that's gonna wrap up this video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Are you excited for Titanfall 2 or Resident Evil 7? Both games are two of my more anticipated games coming out in the next few months. I know Titanfall wasn't everybody's cup of tea, but I thought the game was pretty fun, just lacked a lot of content. Titanfall 2 is adding a single player campaign, so there's that, and Resident Evil 7, I just think it has a lot of potential to be the Resident Evil game that I've been hoping for since the release of RE4, and hopefully it does deliver. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. If you have a request for a future video, you can also leave that in the comments, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.